Questions for reflection. We continue today with the account of the Lord working with and through the prophet Elijah. In our first reading, we find the prophet fleeing from the wrath of Jezebel. Many people have heard of the dramatic encounter between this great Old Testament prophet and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. It's recorded in the 18th chapter of the Old Testament book of 1 Kings. The prophet confronts hundreds who oppose him in a test of faith. Each builds an altar and calls upon his God to send fire to consume it. Elijah is the only one whose prayer is answered, as the altar and sacrifice are consumed by fire. That is because Baal is a pagan idol. After Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, he was exhausted. Then he learned of the threat upon his life from Jezebel. We find this mighty man of God so distraught that he even prays for death. This same mighty prophet runs for cover, seeking refuge in a desert under a broom tree, begging God to take his life when confronted by the wicked queen named Jezebel, who has heard the news of the encounter from Ahab, her husband, whom she had led into idolatry. In this passage, we find him retreating to a cave. But the Lord followed him in. There in the silence, Elijah learns to hear the voice of God as he passed by. Not in a mighty wind, an earthquake, or a fire, but in a gentle whisper, the kind that can only be heard by one who has a surrendered ear to hear the Lord speak. Do we listen for the still small voice of the Lord? He is speaking. The psalmist David listened for that still small voice, or when he did not, he simply cried out all the more. That is persevering prayer. He sought the face of the Lord. Do we persevere in prayer in difficult and arduous times in our own lives? We can. We should. He waits to hear us. In the gospel passage appointed for today's Holy Mass, we pick up on the ongoing teaching of Jesus in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of St. Matthew, the teaching on the indissolubility of marriage. Jesus opens up the deeper understanding of the moral life. It's not only about sinful acts, it's about the heart. The heart, in the biblical and theological sense, is not the organ at the center of our chest cavity, but rather, as the Catholic Catechism teaches, the seat of our moral personality, the place where we make our fundamental choices. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be as well. Because of this, the heart in the Bible and the teaching of Jesus is the place where sin first emerges. When we turn away from God and turn to idols, misguided passions, or choices against what the Lord has called us to do and to be, we are called to turn back to God. This teaching of Jesus calls his disciples, and that includes you and me, to give their heart completely over to him and allow it to be continually converted and transformed by grace. Grace is divine life, and it's given to us by the Lord in prayer and through the sacraments of the Church. So it's in this understanding of the heart we become adulterers when we look at a woman with lust, Matthew 5:28. And in Mark's Gospel, we read that what comes out of the heart makes us unclean. That's in chapter 7. Where's our heart? Is it given over fully to the Lord? Or are we half-hearted in our commitment to the Lord and the Catholic faith?